Team School. I'm really looking forward to the session today. I think negotiation is a hugely important topic and basically has a role to play in most of our lives. So this is a great opportunity to hear from others that have had to incorporate it into their daily lives, whether work or personal. So I'll start off by just giving you a small introduction to myself, and I wanted to tell you a bit about how negotiation basically plays a part in what we do at work. So my role at the university is a business development manager, and the team that I work in, we are responsible for knowledge exchange activities, which really includes a range of different activities. But one of those activities is collaborative projects that we do with externals. I wanted to start by giving you an example of a collaborative project and then look at really in just one project, the variety of different negotiation opportunities and touch points that come out of it. So collaborative projects could be, for example, a business that's thinking of developing a particular app that helps healthcare industry approaches the university for support. They have the idea, they have the innovative knowledge, but they're also lacking knowledge, expertise, facilities to be able to progress with this project. And also they might require funding. So they approach the university and we work with them to bring together a team that looks at how can they take this project forward. Now, in this one project, there is various points of negotiation that happens. It starts off by scoping the project, seeing exactly what it is that the client wants and potentially if what they want is achievable, moving on to what intellectual property comes out of these particular projects and potentially what are those rights and who would own it, looking at project costing and also how the funding would be distributed amongst the different partners, and also clarifying the roles that each partner would play. Now, the role that we play, our team plays in all of this is around facilitating the communication, making sure that basically everything is extremely clear, while also acknowledging the fact that most probably the different parties are coming to this basically project with different interests in mind. So the example that I just gave was clearly a work-related example, and there's enough examples in our personal lives, each of us, if we look back on it, where negotiation is needed. Negotiation plays a huge part in day-to-day life, from whether it's at work, so things like negotiating responsibilities, salaries, which I think is the most common one that everybody can very easily connect with, to taking on, I guess, contributing to the workload, getting the services that you need from basically other departments that you work with, as well as the negotiations that you do with the clients that you work with, but also in our personal lives. So things like negotiating, even with a landlord, services that you get from other places. So it is a huge part of our daily lives that we might notice some of them and others basically go undetected. So if it does play such a big role, why do we not particularly enjoy it or why do we avoid it? And there are so many reasons for avoidance. The biggest, I think, is really that sense of conflict, the sense of rejection, the sense of discomfort that it gives us. Are we in a place to negotiate something that is to our benefit? The worry that it comes across as slightly aggressive, that you're, depending on potentially the opportunity that you have to negotiate in, recognizing the fact that is this the time to negotiate or actually do I need to delay it a bit? And also just mere confidence. How confident do I feel in actually negotiating for the situation that I'm currently in? So it is a skill, but it's a skill that can be improved. And it's great to have panel members here who, just before you joined, we had already started the discussion on negotiation. And it was quite interesting to hear how many different aspects of it was coming up. So I'd like to start off by introducing the panel. I'll start with Corey Smith, who graduated from Kingston in business economics in 2002. He has a wealth of experience in the property sales and management industry, but he is currently the director of Conscious Living Management, which provides high performance consulting, training, and people development solutions. Nice to have you here, Corey. I'll go on to Krishma. Navsaria, who basically also graduated from economics, but in 1999, and she began her career in finance at JP Morgan and then transitioned to lead corporate partnerships at a startup. Currently, she is philanthropy manager at SmartWorks, which basically means that she designs donor engagement strategies and growth initiatives for the charity that she works in. And finally, Warren Saunders, who graduated in film studies in 2009. And Warren's background comes from basically working across consumer technology and market insight companies such as Sony, Samsung, Infosystems, and GfK. And currently, he is the Chief Revenue Officer at WGSN. So again, thank you all for being here. And I really wanted to start basically our talk with giving the floor to each of you to both talk a bit about yourselves, but also give us a memorable negotiation experience that you've gone through. Shall we start with Corey?
Yes, thank you very much. So property is a lot about negotiation and sales, and I started as a property negotiator, having had a family background in property. So that kind of led me into property sales. But I would say the one important thing about negotiation for me is the power to help or hurt. So nobody's going to negotiate with you if you don't have any power. So, for example, I went to Marrakesh about 10 or so years ago, and I was looking for a tea set, a silver tea set with a silver tray. And that's the only thing I was looking for. So I went to Marrakesh in the market, and I was looking around. And I noticed that a lot of sellers were selling it. But I didn't know the price, so I needed to get an idea on what the price was. And so one thing I found with them is that when you walked away, they would be willing to negotiate on a price, because they would say a price, and I thought it'd be outrageous based on what they were selling. But once you walked away, they were willing to offer you a better price. So the key takeaway here is to have options, because there were a lot of sellers selling the item in the market, and I was able to walk away. But when you become very emotionally involved, then you lessen your power. So if you have the ability to walk away and not do the deal, then it puts you in a much stronger position. So that in a nutshell. Yeah.
Interesting. Power to help or hurt. A good sentence to keep in mind.
Preferably to help. Preferably to help. But at the same time, if two people are in a relationship and one person was the lead, it could potentially hurt the other person. So it's not hurting intentionally, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, really good point. Really good point. Thank you for that. Karishma, can I come to you?
Absolutely. Hi there. Very fond memories of Kingston, so I'm very happy to be here. With negotiations, so as you mentioned, my role at the moment is in charities, and I help to build donor strategies. And prior to that, I was in the for-profit space, JP Morgan as a private banker. And it's interesting because they're not too dissimilar. I think my role, whether it be when I was in finance or whether it be here, is a really exciting mix of strategy, storytelling, and people skills. And it's all aimed at creating opportunities. And I think in essence, that's quite a lot about what negotiation is. I think that I realized that everything we do, whether we're at home, whether at work, as you quite rightly said, is around negotiation. I think one thing, at JP Morgan, I did a lot around negotiating deals, around fees mainly, because when we think about negotiation, we think about money. But actually, I think, Corey, you're right, it's so much more than that. And I think one example that I've got that really stands out is when I was at a startup called Wealthy Hair. And essentially what we did was work with organizations using finance actually as a force for good. And my role was to secure funding from corporate partners. And using finance as a force for good, when you think about companies, you think about how do they retain talent, how do they speak to maybe when it's gender focused or young people focused, people that don't necessarily engage themselves in that, how do you speak to them more about that? And automatically you would assume that a company would be interested. However, when you think about the actual concept, we were providing strategy and insight. So actually it's not tangible, and quite often being altruistic and doing good, it isn't really enough. And it's quite a difficult concept, because when you think about negotiation, actually, it needs to be tangible quite often the other person needs to understand what it is. So it had to really be reframed as something that could be positioned in that way and easily accessible, or essentially for in more easily available for people to understand. So the way I had to do it was I had to reposition the whole conversation, making it tangible, but also understanding what the problem was that they were solving for. And I think that's what negotiation is. It has to be mutually beneficial. You need to understand what value they're looking for, and then you can try to think about how you're going to solve that, because that's what you're doing. You're solving for something that they need. And in this instance, I realized it was actually they wanted to know what they were going to get from it in terms of, can they access more audiences, so more clients, and actually is it going to help them from an income perspective?
A really good point. I think I'd like to just pull out what you said around what is the want. So what are these two parties, two individuals coming to the table, each with their own expectation of something to come to take away. And the point that you made around reframing it, looking at it from a different angle, and basically focusing on that, I think is a really good point, and also part of another. There will be follow-up question around a bit more around that as well coming forward. So before we go into that question, Warren, can I come to you for the last story?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think obviously any negotiation is kind of contextual, so it kind of depends the environment in which you're working. But having negotiated in my role, you know, a lot of kind of high value deals with our customers, normally on a kind of subscription basis, or whether we're selling product, I think there's kind of two what would be almost feel like slightly conflicting pieces of advice, but I think they both kind of work. One is making it less personal and making it more personal. And what I guess I mean there is, when you're dealing in a corporate environment and you're working with a procurement team, they've got an agenda and they're coming for you. And what they don't like is you kind of personalizing it, because, you know, if you humanize the situation a little bit, it can kind of take the edge off some of the tougher negotiations. And, you know, you see each other more as people and less as just something that you're going after a certain percentage in terms of discounts or in terms of specific targets. So you can kind of slightly wrong foot the negotiation, sometimes in a positive way. I think the flip side of that is you also have to make it less personal. And I think we'll talk more about that probably as we go through the session. But you know, one of the reasons we find it difficult is because we take it personally. And I had a situation a couple of years ago where I was involved with one of my team in a significant negotiation with a customer. And I could see the person on my team who was the account manager getting more and more upset. And I could see him really taking it personally, and even getting to the point of really getting quite angry about it. And I actually had to a couple of times stop the meeting, take him out of the room and say, look, you just need to take the heat out of this. This is not about you. You know, this is not a personal situation. They've got an agenda. We've just got to work to that agenda. You've got to not take it personally. And I think that sort of fear of rejection or that anger and pride is part of what makes negotiation difficult for us. But it is a lot of the time, you know, just a bit of a dance that we have to do, I think, in a corporate environment, really.
And that's such an important note. If I were to rephrase what you said, is really, rather than focusing on what yourself and potentially what it is that you feel or what it is it's your agenda, trying to detach yourself so that you also have the ability to listen well to the other person in order to be able to manage the situation that you're in. So I like the point you're making around not allowing it to become personal, so that you can actually have more control in that situation around what you want to put at the table and have discussions around. And that really brings us very nicely into the first question. So if you're happy, Warren, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to the other panel members. Can you help really understand, or help the panel and the delegates really think about what kind of things should we have in place before we go into an opportunity of negotiation? Is there anything we can prepare for?
Yeah, and I think Krista mentioned it as well. A lot of it is about the value that you're bringing and really knowing the value that you're bringing. I think that's really relevant. One of the things you talked about around, you know, negotiating salary, you know, before you go into that room, have some examples of times when you've really brought value to a situation. You know, maybe you can even put $1 or £1 value on that and say, you know, I managed this project, we saved this amount of money. I think, you know, when I'm in a negotiation with the customer, I don't want to kind of go front off with it, but I want to have it in the back pocket to know, well, you know, we did these, you know, we brought this level of value to you, or we saved you this amount of money, or this was something we worked on and, you know, we got great feedback from your team on it. So I think in any kind of negotiation, being able to quantify the value that you've brought to the other party and that they've taken from the relationship in the past, whether that's, you know, personal or professional, I think it is a really important point.
Anybody on the panel willing to share their thoughts on how do you identify and communicate that value? So I think that because it's been mentioned twice now, it's something that we should really delve into as to what does that mean when you're talking about your value or potentially what it is that you want to offer? How do you determine that, whether on a personal note or whether in a professional setting? Any ideas, any basically suggestions as to how we can go about doing that?
Corey, I'll just jump in on one
Go ahead,
thing.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
Warren said something really important before about individuals and corporates, because actually when you're thinking about negotiation, they're two very different things. So when you're dealing with a corporate, it's much more data driven, results driven, it's much more formalized, if you like. But I think when it's individual, there is an element of emotion that is involved. And so actually that rapport and that relationship build, while it's necessary on both sides, I think with the individual, there is that element of really getting to understand them, building trust, as you do with the corporate, but much more emotion is involved in that, I think. So I just wanted to touch upon that prior to the other question you raised. Corey, I'll let you answer that question first, and then I can jump in after it.
Yeah, can you just rephrase the question? I got lost in it a bit. Can you rephrase the question, Sahar?
Sure, no problem. So the question really was, we talked about the importance of being able to get across your value and the value proposition that you're bringing to the table. But I'd love if we could open that up as to how do you identify that? How do you determine that? Potentially, especially when you're looking at a negotiation opportunity.
I'd say the key thing is how unique is what you do and what you bring to the table. If you're the only person that does what you do, you're in a very strong position. But if there's 1,000 other, 1,000,000 other, it's quite a weak position. So like, for example, you have, take for example, who am I thinking of? Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is a big box office movie star. He does very well at what he does. He's a very good actor. There's very few like Tom Cruise. So he can command a very high value for what he does. So the more unique you are and the more it is that people want what you have, the stronger position you're in. But if you're a commodity like rice, for example, rice you can get from anywhere. So the price, there's not much margin in price. But if you're very unique, like say like a Hermes handbag, which is very unique, it commands a high price, essentially. Yeah.
So you're, yeah. So what you're suggesting is make sure that potentially you also identify what makes you different from others that are providing a similar service, and then make sure that
key attribute, because otherwise it's just they can go anywhere, you know. Yeah. Definitely.
Anybody else?
I think I agree with what both Corey and Warren are saying. And I think in addition to that, when you're thinking about your value, thinking about the conversation that you're having, what value are you bringing to them? So what makes you unique? Definitely. What value are you adding? What are you solving for them? And when you're thinking about whether it's just your employer, think about the wider audience, the company itself. You know, what's the impact on the company's clients? And I think when you do that, bring data to the table. And come to them with proof points, because that also helps you with your own self-doubt, which is one of the reasons we hate negotiation, because it's nerve-wracking and we don't think we're worthy of it quite often. So I think when you come to the table with those data points of this is how I'm impacting not only my direct team, not only with the work that I'm doing that makes me unique, but this is how it's actually affecting your bottom line. And if it is a corporate negotiation, if it is a salary negotiation, show them what numbers are. And how you're impacting those numbers, whether it's directly or indirectly.
Very
the
true,
more
very true.
proof points you have, and shifting the focus from just you to much broader and everyone else that's going to benefit in the long term, I think that's what makes them open their minds up a little bit more to think, actually, without them and without us showing them their value, then, you know, we're going to lose out even more so in the long run, and so too are our clients and whoever else will be impacted.
And I think that's a really important point you're making. So the two things of basically what is your unique selling point, but what's the data, what's the information that you can provide that demonstrates that basically position that you are now in is hugely important in this space. Let me ask another question. Corey, can I come to you with this one?
Yes, go ahead.
Basically, how do you identify those key attributes needed for negotiation? So imagine that you've got a scenario where potentially, you know, there are different things that impact the people that you are in negotiation with. How do you decide at that point or in preparation for that meeting as to what kind of attributes to consider? So we talked about, for example, the importance of key listening and active listening, but are there any other things, or bringing data, bringing enough information to support what it is that you're saying? Anything else that you think is important to touch on?
Absolutely. My key skill is fact finding. There's a Colby Index, which I highly recommend, which will show you how you take action. I'm like an 8 on the fact finder, and my one would be to find out as much as the person I'm negotiating with as possible. You know, as much about their needs and their wants as possible, and then I would do my best to supply those needs. So if I figure that they have 5 important needs, then I want to say, okay, can I supply those needs? And if I can, that puts me in a strong position. But I have to know who I'm negotiating with. What are their hopes? What are their fears? What do they value? What is it? Is it money? Is it recognition? I have to know what are their internal drivers. So I have to really go into their world and understand who they are. And because sometimes someone will say what they want, but that's only on the top of their mind. Really, there's a deep-seated desire or want that they want. And it's being able to tap into that. What is it that they really want? Because sometimes people will say what they want, but really it's not what they really, really want. So it's being able to tap down into what do they really want. And it may not be to do with money. It may be it may be just a little recognition. Or so you never know. So each person is different, even in a corporate situation or a personal situation. To get to know that person intimately in what do they want? You know, do they want their ego stroked? It could be that. So to find out the key thing, what they want, and just help them get it. You know, and if you can remove the barriers to helping them get what they want, then you know they love you for it. You know.
Yeah, I'd like to take what you just said because I think it leads really well into the point around the importance of relationships. And this was mentioned in the discussion up to now. Warren, if it's okay, I want to come to you with this question as to, do you have any tips on how to build relationships, establish trusts, and allow for that part of the negotiation relationship to be built?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it builds a bit on what Corey said. I think even within the same negotiation, you may have to deal with different audiences, you know, so someone in a procurement department will come with a different agenda to someone, you know, probably your day-to-day contact in an organization, and they will have a different set of objectives around the same deal. And so in order to build those relationships, I think, as I sort of said, I think there is a benefit in trying to make things more personal if you can in what can be a very faceless corporate environment, you know, and that can be as simple as asking people if they've had a good weekend, or like, you know, they're really kind of basic, kind of take the heat out of those what can be very stressful situations by trying to sort of personalize the people on either side. I think there are kind of corporate objectives, and, you know, Corey sort of touched on some of that, but I think there are also just, you know, treating people with, you know, the just basic dignity and just kind of treating them as people rather than as, you know, sort of just a barrier in your way to getting the deal done, you know. And I think that's just a simple you know, and that comes back to, again, what Corey said, I think, which is, you know, what people want. They're going to want a complex series of things, but one of the things is feeling that they've been listened to, feeling that they've been heard, giving them the chance to speak, and really trying to understand their objectives, but also, as I say, just trying to personalize things as much as possible in a corporate environment, I think really helps, because it's much harder to play hardball with someone you kind of like rather than someone you just see as a sort of, you know, faceless corporate conversation, really.
Definitely. If we look at that famous saying, although it's purely on purchasing something, the famous saying of people buy from people comes from the same thing, is that really it is about the relationships that you build, and also how much you can invest in that time, keeping in mind that you also have to deliver on your KPIs, you have to deliver on the activities that you have basically bringing to the table as well. But it is very much around the importance of that. One other thing that I'd like to talk about is around the element of credibility. So we know that another aspect of being able to succeed in negotiation is if the person that is basically coming to you or you want to negotiate with feels like you are a credible source to go to. So we've talked about data, we've talked about potentially, you know, listening to them, seeing exactly what it is that they need and being able to respond to that. Anything else around building credibility that will help basically in negotiation? And in essence, do you also believe in this, that credibility plays an important part in the negotiation element of basically any scenario that you're involved in?
I think that everything we've spoken about up to now, it's all interlinked. So you think about active listening, making sure you're understanding what it is they want, humanizing the whole thing. You know, it all plays a part, because it's not just, as you said, it's not just about the act of purchasing or selling. It really is about understanding, building that emotion, using that emotional intelligence, you know, whether it's to really listen to them, not just wait for it to be your turn, because it's quite evident when you're speaking with someone, you know, and you're negotiating something and you're not really listening to them and you're just waiting for it to be your turn to then speak, and then not really answer what they're asking you. So when you talk about credibility, I think that really is a culmination of all these things, because you're not just going to go up to somebody having met them for a minute and start a negotiation. Quite often you're going to take the time to say, hi, how are you? And, you know, this is if it's an initial interaction. If it's a long-standing partnership where you're getting into a negotiation, you're going to really build that rapport by understanding them, you know, whether it's knowing how they are, and what Warren was saying about, you know, it might be a corporate environment, but maybe how are you today? Getting to know what their family life is like, getting to know what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy. Because I think ultimately I see these days, whether it's you're going for a job, whether it's you're going to buy something, whether you're deciding who to buy it from, you tend to have built up a network, and you'll get a referral in order to do that, because you've built up trust, you've built a relationship, they become credible to you because somebody else has utilized them. And I think that's how you build up credibility. It's that emotional aspect, and that emotional that empathy that you show towards someone, or you build up an understanding of who they are. Because I think we were talking before the session about, you know, how things have changed, and I think COVID has gone a long way to showing us that actually as people, it's not just about a product, it's not just about a job, it's not just about a company, it's about who we really are in our entirety. So you need to get to know someone and all that they're about before you can start any kind of, you know, trust build, relationship build, ultimately credibility.
Credibility. Good answer. Good answer.
I think that answers it a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that the point you made around how they are interconnected is an important one. The other point made, I think it was by Warren, if I'm not mistaken, that really you're looking at your scenario and making those decisions. What is needed at this point in time? So there is also that element of the emotional intelligence that we have. What does the person in front of me need at this point? Do they need an ear to listen to, or potentially do they need data in front of them to make a decision? Do they need interactions discussions with the wider team? What is it that's needed at this point in time in order to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with taking it forward? Corey, can I bring the same question to you around the credibility before I go on to the next question?
Absolutely, yeah. We were having a chat before we came on about credibility and, or not credibility, but 10 years ago, I did negotiate an event at Kingston University on site. And so it's almost like 10-year anniversary. But in that event, I recommended a book called How I Raised Myself from Success to Failure to Success in Selling. And it's a book I still use today. I've had it about 15 years. But it was recommended to me by a company I did coaching with. But the book's like 60, 70 years old. So it's got like a lot of credibility. So the book's 70 years old. I've read it dozens and dozens of times. But it's fundamental to relationships. And yeah, it's a key book to Associate Simon. It goes into how to build trust and credibility, because credibility is about power, isn't it? It's about how much credit you have, how much power you have, basically. And if I mentioned that I was 10 years ago, I did that event on site, it shows that I've got more credibility. This book is 78 years old. It's still in print. It's got a lot of credibility. A lot of people have used it. It works. It's got a lot of credibility, and it taps into the humanness. So things have changed technologically, but people at their essence are still the same. So tap into principles and things that work consistently. So human nature. So that, credibility for me. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think the last point that you were making, that even though there's been so much change over the last 10 years, and there'll probably be even faster changes with the changes in technology these days, that will hopefully make improvements in efficiency of things, but there's still that element of, well, how can I really assess that this is the right partnership, that this is the right relationship to be going into, that this is the right person to be buying from, and so forth. And that's still a human trait to be considered, as well as looking at all the evidence that's basically available for you to have a look at. Warren, are you happy for me to slightly change this into a more personal setting? So we've talked about corporate world, we've talked about the world of work quite a bit, but I think when it comes to scenarios where individuals are negotiating for themselves, so this is more of a personal capacity, it seems to be much harder for people to basically navigate, or they feel like it's it's like seems a bit pushy, or they're worried about being perceived as demanding. Any tips or any ideas as to how they can overcome this, and also potentially what is the outcome of it if you don't do it, so to speak?
Well, I think the basic tenets that we've talked about are still true. I think there's a credibility credibility in that environment, I think, is about the credibility of what you're asking for. So in a corporate environment, you might open in a very extreme way because it's part of a dance and a negotiation. So you might know that your first ask is something the other party can't give, and you know that you have to have the to and fro. I think in a more personal environment, whether you're negotiating, in a work environment for your own salary, or you're negotiating with family members in a slightly more sort of ad hoc sort of a way, I think it's about that credibility of request. So making sure that what you're asking for is something the other person is going to be comfortable to give you. And I think in a personal environment, you will know that, hopefully you will know those people well enough that, what you're asking for is something that they can give. Because I think it's even more, I think where it's similar to the corporate environment is that even at a personal level, there needs to be a little bit of a win-win. There's always should always be a trade-off. You're asking for something, but you're giving something back. But I think it also, you also need to know the other party well enough, hopefully, that, say if you're negotiating your own salary, you're not going to go in and ask them to double it, because, that might be crazy, but, you're asking for something that's credible and really understanding your value in the same way, because it is about you. And again, I think partly it's context related. I mean, obviously in my role, I hire a lot of sales leaders, I kind of expect them to negotiate because, you know, that's kind of their job, you know, so I expect them to play hard on salary, but in different environments, it might be very different. But I think it's all about that context. And I think really, you know, going back to what others have said much earlier, it's about focusing on that win-win in any kind of environment, that you're giving something, but you're getting something back. I think it feels like that there's a kind of fair exchange at that point.
Mm-hmm. Warren, you touched on the fact that in your current role, you expect negotiation from bringing in new employees or new sales managers to work with. Whether this is a personal response or if you think that it can also be generic, are there any things that you see in that negotiation that puts you off, that basically you feel like it's actually a barrier as opposed to you know, an opportunity that they're taking to negotiate?
I think that's a really good question. And I think it's difficult. I think over a period of time, as you go through your career, you can kind of sense a little bit what the difference is. It's difficult to really put your finger on it between what I would call kind of a heartfelt negotiation and what's more kind of posturing, or what come. And I think the other thing is, when you are negotiating in that environment, it's really important that you don't come across as arrogant. You know, I think it's about having pride and knowing your value. And I think this comes back to having all the data. So, you know, maybe you've benchmarked a salary against other similar roles, or, you know, you've got some kind of, but you're not sort of coming across as kind of, you know, just as arrogant or just being pushy. I think it's quite tough to walk that line sometimes, I think. But I think I think you learn it over time, and I can kind of sense it. And I expect, if I'm hiring someone more senior, I expect them to really be able to walk that line. Whereas maybe if someone more junior is coming in, that kind of ebullience and kind of like, you know, enthusiasm and kind of the arrogance kind of can almost be seen as a positive. I think, again, it's kind of context dependent, really.
I think one thing that, again, something that you've mentioned that falls back on the person who's also negotiating, is that self-awareness and self-reflection that comes after these negotiations. Is that what did work? What do I feel as a person who negotiated didn't work? What do I need to take into consideration next time? The point you made around, again, going to these situations, whether personal or professional, with information, with data, so you've got something to compare it with, gives credibility, gives you the confidence as to what to negotiate with, but also basically allows you to really feel more confident and you know, feel better with yourself as to what I'm asking for isn't far-fetched. I love the word you use, credibility of request. That's a new phrase I hadn't heard of before. Anybody else like to add something? Corey, Karishma, to this point?
Second, what Warren said about win-win, and when you mentioned win-win, I was thinking about the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because Stephen Covey talks about win-win and win-win or no deal. So it's got to be good for both of us, or being able to walk away. And still that is part of, could be a win for you, being able to walk away from the deal. And win-win, setting up, okay, you gain, I gain, but the 7 Habits goes into your value system. Like, what are your values? Because, you know, over and above money or anything, your value system. Because if you know yourself, if you have knowledge of self, and you know what you really want, if that person is not able to give it to you, then it'll be better for you to walk away based on principles, because then you'll be in alignment with yourself. So having knowledge of yourself and what you really want, as well as what the other person really wants, then you can get into some alignment. And then even if you walk away, it won't be such a bad deal, because you're like, okay, that, fair enough, it wasn't what I really wanted. They weren't able to give it to me, so I should go somewhere and find it, you know? And courage, that takes courage. It takes courage to be able to walk away. Yeah.
I think
definitely.
I
Yeah, sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, I completely agree with Corey. And that was one thing I was going to say, that I think, negotiation is really important. You want to secure a deal, you want to secure a pay rise or a salary, but actually quite often, and I've seen this with, in the charity capacity as well, quite often you have not quite often, but occasionally you might have a conversation and you need to know when to walk away. It might not align with you, with your focus, with your mission, and it's okay. Because actually you're doing it for the long haul, for the greater good. So actually, and I think there's a lot of confidence in being able to do that, and it instills more confidence in you. And I just wanted to touch on, Sahar, if you don't mind, what we're talking about in the personal capacity, because I think being able to set the tone of the negotiation, if you can be confident and you can advocate for yourself in being able to set the tone of the negotiation, that alone is going to establish credibility for you. And so you're walking in there with a certain mindset, and that's going to be taken. And I think, being uncomfortable in a personal capacity it's human. I've done it. I feel it. I still feel it to this day. And we've all struggled with it. And I think reframing it as it not being an unreasonable demand, but again, what Warren, with the right expectations and being in the right position and positioning yourself in the right way, but ensuring that fair value, I think you need to know what your contributions are and shifting your mindset from this is unreasonable, I'm doing am I doing the right thing because I don't deserve it? But actually you're doing it because you want to ensure that your value is recognized. And I think that's really important. Reframing it as a conversation, not confrontation, because that's key as well. I think that's where we sometimes struggle, because we think, oh my God, we're going to have to go confront someone. But actually, when you're having a conversation, it all flows naturally.
Really good point. And again, I think
sorry.
That's okay.
I was just going to come in what Karishma said about uncomfortableness, and obviously that something to say is emotions up, intelligence down. So the higher the stakes, the higher the emotion, the lower the intelligence. So thinking about team and bringing someone else in to be your advocate to help you negotiate, because that will strengthen your cause. Because sometimes we not have the total presence of mind, but if you have a team member who's with you, who can maybe advocate for you and say what you may not say in that moment, that could be very beneficial. So teamwork. I just said that.
Yeah, if you've got the team, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think each of you have touched on some really important points. The one thing that I would, I guess, highlight in that is that element of make sure that you can detach yourself from the situation of what is it that I'm going into this meeting or into this event or into this talk with. What is, and also the point around knowing where your cutoff point is to walk away. Potentially you don't have to come out with a deal. It isn't always the case that you need to come out with a deal. And if it is a case that you have to come out with a deal, as to what is that cutting point that you're not willing to potentially move from. So those are really important aspects. One final question, and then we'll look at the questions that have been posted for us. And that is if each of you were going to potentially give one technique or tool that you could recommend for an individual to improve their negotiation skills, what would that be? Warren, can we start with you, please?
Oh, crikey. I was hoping you weren't going to start me on that question, because I can't think of a great answer.
That's fine. Who else would like to
Corey's
take it?
good.
I'm happy to give it to Corey or to
Corey's book sounds
Karishma.
good. I'm going to check it. I'm going to check that out. I think that there is, there's a lot of good commercial training available. I guess I'd go back to what Corey said, actually, in that last question. It's not the best answer, but I think it's relevant here, is about that team piece. I think if you're going into any kind of environment, bounce it around with some people first. Like, am I being unreasonable here? Does this feel like something I can ask for? Is the EU kind? What would you do in this situation? I think I think my sales team are much better in negotiation if I've given them the confidence to fail. I've said, look, at this point, it's fine. We don't need that deal. It's not profitable for us, or it doesn't work for us. I think working together as a team to set that context, and in a personal environment, talking to a friend and saying, am I being out of order asking for this, or is this wrong? I think that is the best advice you'll get, is that validation from people who know you, you know, and can help you to kind of get to the outcome. And I think along with some of the kind of more formalized training and the kind of text that Corey mentioned, I think those are the two things I think really can help you get to the right response and help you feel more comfortable about going into those discussions.
Good answer. Corey, I'll bring the question to you now.
I'd say one technique, but it's the kind of rule for life, is finding out what others want and helping get it. That would be the key. That's summing up how I raised myself from failure to success in selling. Finding out what that person wants and helping them get in it, helping them get it. And that's the thing, because we all want something, and if you can help someone, then you know, especially the more important it is, the more they love you, isn't it? And the more they want to keep you around. You know, whether it's a wife or a husband, you know.
Whether personal or at work. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I think one of the things that always taught me to think about it and how to think about it, and it basically just reinforces what both Warren and Corey have just said, is when I think about splitting a chocolate biscuit with my brother. And the reason I say that is, first of all, if we have one chocolate biscuit between us, it's like, well, okay, what is his reasoning for wanting it? So what matters most? Does he want it because he just wants it because I want it? Does he want it because he's really hungry, or he wants a little snack? And then that will determine, well, okay, well, let me craft a solution. Do I get him another treat? Do I split it? Or do I just say no? Yeah. And so from then, I think about the solution is going to be where we both feel like a winner. So either I get the chocolate biscuit, we split it, or he gets the chocolate biscuit and I have a banana. So that's why I always think about the chocolate biscuit split.
I'll make sure that I put that on LinkedIn as well. Chocolate biscuit split.
Great.
That was very helpful. Thank you. Should we take some of the questions that have been posted in the chat? Janice, if you're here to help us. Thank you.
I am indeed. So we've had a couple coming in so far. So if you have any more, I think you can probably still have time to post them. Azim asked about the ethics in negotiation. Do we stick to truth or half truths? Do we ever deceive to get what we want? And I'm sure there's many examples where we feel like we're not being quite as honest because we don't want to play our full cards, or maybe appear to be quite so emotionally involved in what we're aiming for. So yeah, maybe over to the panel, to that one who fancied answering that.
I'd say that's a brilliant one, ethics. And there is a segment in How I Raised Myself to Success in Selling, in that where the person is selling insurance and they weren't going to be honest about the policy, but the manager said he may not know it, as in the client, but you will know it. So if you've cheated someone, you will know it. And that will affect your self-esteem, your integrity, and your ability to hold a position. So honesty, for me, is the best policy, because you have confidence in yourself, you know, and I think that's the best thing ever. If you can go home at night and you can be at peace with yourself, then for me, that's the best. So ethics is very important in terms of, and it will lead you into the best places. If you have solid ethics, you know, people will be able to rely on you and count on you. So number one, integrity and being honest and open. And sometimes it may be extremely difficult to own up, or not be, or to admit that maybe you've done something wrong, or something's not going to come out how you wanted it. Like I had clients, I worked for Ralph Lauren for a bit, and I had a client who purchased a very expensive lampshade and it wasn't going to arrive. And a lot of things were not being delivered. And it put me in a very difficult position of not being able to deliver, but to be honest with them, look, it's not going to arrive. And then having to keep changing the date as to when it's going to arrive. And I had to walk away from that situation because my integrity is everything. So I'm not going to promise something and not deliver. So, you know, it's, for me, that's most important. If I cannot deliver, then I've got to walk away, because then I'm doing the client a disservice and myself a disservice. So yeah, ethics is very important. Yeah.
I think also it speaks to credibility and building trust. And I think that you also have to think about, and this is something we haven't talked about yet, but non-verbal comms. We might think that what they are understanding from us is what we're saying, but actually you can clearly establish when something is not quite there. And I think you have to be honest. And actually there's something about authenticity as well, because that's another way of building credibility and trust. People can tell when you're being authentic and you're being genuine. So I think non-verbal comms very apparent. I think being authentic lends to being credible, and being that all lends itself to kind of when you think about ethics and being truthful about all of this. And they'd rather you be honest, like Corey was saying, about not being able to deliver on time, and then they'll be more understanding about it, rather than thinking that they will and then you end up letting them down, or then they found out later.
Good answers. Good answers. I'm conscious there's more questions. Dennis, are you happy to?
They are coming through.
Yeah.
We obviously had the wonderful links to the book that Corey has been referencing in the chat as well, but we can make sure that goes out too, and the recording is available.
I don't receive any money from it, by the way.
No commission. It sounds fascinating. I'm going to actually skip over my question because I was sort of, it was a thought, but I'm going to go to Megan. Is negotiation different as a woman, and how can you gain respect still negotiating without being dismissed or not being taken too seriously? So maybe I'll go to Zaha or Krishma to look at that one, or anyone actually, whoever fancies that. Who answers that?
I think that, so I actually going to refer back to what I said about authenticity. I had a conversation with someone yesterday at an event, and we were talking about how previously, back in the day, maybe even it still happens now, that there are certain times where women have felt that they would need to come across as quite not assertive is good, but aggressive, because they have to be demanding and they have to have that aggressive stance for to be listened to. But actually, I think that you can be confident and you can be assertive, but you don't have to be aggressive. And I think when you're negotiating, I stand by advocating for yourself and having a level of confidence. Again, there was a time when I was in finance and I was not confident. I was not always confident. And it clearly tells. And then they start to doubt, whoever you're talking to will start to doubt what you're saying. But I think if you can assert that level of confidence and assertiveness, and it doesn't always come easily and it doesn't always come immediately, and it is practice and it is trying and it's talking to your friends about it and talking to your team, absolutely, because they will build you up. So I think it takes time, but I think it's possible to be done. And I think negotiation as a woman can be just as effective as with anyone else. But I also say that there are times when you don't feel like it is. But again, it's just building yourself up to get there.
Can I add something to that point? Because you made a really, really important point there. In the world of decision making, there are steps that you take as a person who is making a decision. So imagine that you put your, let's say, offer out into the world, whether it's a product, a service, you want to I'm looking at it a very simple sales exchange scenario here. Part of it is to do with me, which is my offer, my basically service, and what it is that I'm putting it out there, and what language am I putting it out there. The other half is the decision making of the person who is buying from you. So in this process, the first step that a person takes is basically assessing whether your offer is what it is that they need or not. So potentially they're looking at, yes, this aligns with my needs, and therefore I will make a decision. The next step of decision making is, shall I purchase or shall I not purchase? If they do purchase, if they don't purchase, they go out and look for something that meets their needs. If they do purchase, then the next step of that is to do with the continuous review of, is this still meeting my need or not? So it goes back to partially the question before, which looks at the ethics. If you've lied, regardless of your gender, if you have lied, when it gets to that loop, then potentially this person is not going to stay with you, or is going to not purchase from you again. Now, from a female or male perspective, when you look at this answer, I do think that assertiveness that you're referring to is hugely important, but I also think and I'm not saying men don't have this, but we have empathy that is part and parcel of our DNA, so to speak. And that I think plays a huge part when it comes to understanding a need and being able to align your offer with that need. Because empathy brings with itself listening power. I listen, I believe I've got the solution for it, and I'll put it forward. So I think that there are, but of course, we can't ignore the fact that there are industries, there are scenarios that are, because of the nature of and the history behind it, have been mainly male dominated, and therefore, we need to carve our position into that industry a bit more. But I do think we sometimes take away the importance of decision making of the other person. We feel like negotiation is all on us. It isn't all on us. There is that element of decision making from the other person that comes into play as well.
I agree. I think empathy has a massive part to play. And I won't take away from the fact that there are certain unspoken biases which do exist, but I think that's a different conversation. And they do exist and we're aware of them. And people are trying to navigate that and build a sense of equity so that there is equality across the board.
Exactly.
Thank you. So I think we'll take our final question, and as we gallop into our last minute of this session, it's from Lena. She asked, should you proceed with a scheduled meeting of negotiations if you haven't received all the info from all parties prior to the meeting? So again, I suppose this is kind of understanding what you're actually negotiating with. I'll put this out to the panel as well.
I guess I would say no, you shouldn't proceed, but I would also say that is a negotiation step in itself. And I think it's a way potentially to take the power in a negotiation moment, to say that you're that you're not ready. I think that is a statement and something you can do and push back on. But I think you need to be aware that it also sets a tone and can also impact things further down the line. So you need to be confident that you're doing that at the right time.
Anyone else like to answer? Other thoughts? Same.
Yeah, I would agree with what Ron said. But information is key, isn't it? Because in order to make an accurate decision, you need information. And if you rush, you could rush into something that once you found that information, it turns out that maybe you didn't make it a good decision. So if you can say to wait, then you have power. If you're desperate, then it looks like you've got no power. But if you can, pump the brakes, it shows that you're willing to, stand up, take a position. So, and until you get the information so that you can make a better decision. So the more information is better. And like Warren said, it could be a negotiation tactic. That person's withholding information from you so you can't make a better decision. Or it could be they're just delaying for another reason. So if you can pump the brakes and wait until you get information, then you can make more accurate decisions, basically. Yeah.
Thank you.
People play games. People do play games, unfortunately.
Yeah, some of them aren't being very ethical, perhaps. Maybe that's not like
especially Donald Trump. I have to say, he plays the game. Donald Trump loves to play the game. He's a real estate guy, but he plays hardball and he plays the game. He does.
You were saying earlier, it's winner and loser, isn't it? That's very gamed. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who has joined this session this lunchtime. We really appreciate you giving your time. Thank you all very much. I'm sure you extend our thanks to our panel, to Sahar, to Corey, to Kashmir, to Warren,